Hey there, friends of Beyond Words. Before we dive into today's story, a tale so intense it'll leave your heart racing, I want to know, where are you from? Drop your city or country in the comments below because the story is for you. A dark, stormy night. Rain pounding against the pavement. Lightning flashes across the sky, illuminating a deserted highway. And then, crash. A car spins out of control, slamming into a tree. In that moment, one man steps up. A poor mechanic with nothing but his wits and a heart full of courage. What he does next will not only save a life but also change his own forever. But here's the twist. He had no idea who was inside that car. Little did he know, this single act of bravery would lead to blessings beyond his wildest dreams. Jake Thompson wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Growing up in the small town of Weatherford, Texas, he learned early on that life was about hard work and making do with what you had. At 28, Jake ran a tiny auto repair shop tucked away at the edge of town. His garage wasn't fancy. Just an old metal shed with grease-stained floors and tools older than he was. But it was his pride and joy. Every day, Jake worked tirelessly under the scorching Texas sun, fixing cars for anyone who needed help. He didn't charge much because most of his customers were neighbors struggling as much as he was. Sometimes, when folks couldn't pay, Jake would wave them off with a smile, saying, "We'll settle up another time." Despite his struggles, Jake had a reputation for being one of the kindest souls in town. Kids loved him because he always took the time to fix their bicycles for free. Single moms trusted him because he never overcharged or tried to sell them things they didn't need. Even the local sheriff brought his cruiser to Jake whenever it needed repairs. But behind the smiles and generosity lay a man with big dreams and bigger worries. Jake wanted nothing more than to expand his garage, maybe even open a proper auto shop downtown. But between rent, bills, and keeping food on the table, saving enough money felt impossible. Some nights, after closing up shop, Jake would sit alone in the dim light of his garage, staring at the cracked concrete floor and wondering if he'd ever catch a break. Little did Jake know, fate had something extraordinary planned for him. All it would take was one fateful night and one split-second decision to set everything in motion. It was one of those nights where the world seemed determined to keep everyone indoors. Thunder rumbled across the sky like a warning, and sheets of rain turned the roads into rivers. Jake had spent the evening working late on a busted transmission for a neighbor's truck, his hands blackened with grease and his stomach growling from skipping dinner. Finally, around midnight, he locked up the garage and climbed into his beat-up pickup truck. The drive home was miserable. Windshield wipers slapped furiously against the glass, barely keeping up with the downpour. Visibility was almost zero, and Jake gripped the steering wheel tightly, squinting through the chaos. Just as he rounded a bend near the edge of town, headlights caught his eye, a luxury sedan swerving wildly across the slick road. Before Jake could react, the car skidded off the highway and slammed into a tree with a deafening crunch. Smoke began billowing from the engine, mixing with the rain in eerie spirals. Without hesitation, Jake slammed on his brakes, threw open his door, and sprinted toward the wreckage. "Hey, is anyone hurt? Can you hear me?" he shouted over the storm, his voice nearly drowned out by the howling wind. The driver's side door was crumpled shut, but through the cracked window, Jake saw a figure slumped over the steering wheel. It was a woman, unconscious but breathing shallowly. Flames licked at the edges of the hood, and the smell of burning rubber filled the air. Jake's mind raced. He didn't have much time. Grabbing a crowbar from his truck, he pried open the mangled door with all his strength. Rain soaked him to the bone as he leaned inside, unbuckling her seatbelt and gently pulling her free just moments before the car erupted in flames behind them. Collapsing onto the wet ground, Jake cradled the woman in his arms, shielding her from the rain as best he could. She stirred faintly, murmuring something incoherent. Her face was pale, her designer clothes drenched and torn, but she was alive. Breathing heavily, Jake looked back at the blazing wreckage. His heart pounded, not just from adrenaline, but from sheer relief. He hadn't thought twice about risking his life. It was simply the right thing to do. But what he didn't realize yet was that this stranger wasn't just any woman. And saving her life would change everything. For both of them. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its red and blue lights cutting through the stormy darkness. Paramedics rushed to Jake's side, taking over care of the woman while he stood shivering in the rain. His clothes soaked and his hands trembling. Not from cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. One of the paramedics handed him a blanket and asked if he was okay. "She's alive," Jake muttered, more to himself than anyone else. That's all that matters. At the hospital, the woman, identified as Emily Carter, was rushed into emergency care. Jake waited anxiously in the lobby, pacing back and forth despite the protests of a nurse who insisted he get checked out for shock. Hours passed before a doctor finally emerged, explaining that Emily had suffered minor injuries but would make a full recovery. When Emily woke up later that night, she was groggy and disoriented, her memories of the crash fragmented. But one thing stuck in her mind: the face of the man who'd saved her. She demanded to know who he was. The next morning, Jake received a visitor in the waiting room. It was Emily herself, dressed in borrowed scrubs but radiating an aura of quiet strength. Her piercing green eyes locked onto his as she approached. "You're the one who pulled me out of the car," she said softly, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Carter. Thank you for saving my life." Jake shook her hand awkwardly, still unsure how to process everything. "Just glad I could help," he replied with a shrug. "Anyone would have done the same." Emily smiled faintly, though there was something deeper in her expression. A mix of gratitude and curiosity. Over the next few minutes, they talked briefly about the accident, but Jake noticed she kept steering the conversation toward him. "So, what do you do?" Emily asked casually. "I fix cars," Jake answered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Got a little garage down in Weatherford. Nothing fancy." Emily nodded thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on him. What Jake didn't know, and what Emily chose not to reveal right away, was that she wasn't just any client. She was Emily Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Tech Industries, a multi-billion-dollar tech company based in Austin. To most people, she was untouchable, a symbol of success and power. Yet here she was, sitting across from a humble mechanic who'd risked his life to save hers without expecting anything in return. As they parted ways that day, Emily made a silent promise to herself. Jake Thompson deserved more than a simple thank you. A week later, Jake was back in his garage, elbow-deep in oil as he worked on a rusty old pickup truck. Business had been slow lately, and the weight of unpaid bills gnawed at the edges of his mind. Still, he kept his head down, focusing on the rhythmic clinking of tools against metal. Then, out of nowhere, a sleek black Tesla rolled into the driveway. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. The driver's door opened, and Emily stepped out, wearing jeans and a simple blouse that somehow still screamed elegance. "Jake," she said with a warm smile. "Mind if I interrupt for a bit?" Caught off guard, Jake stammered, Sure. Come on in." Emily walked around the garage, taking in the cluttered shelves and grease-stained workbench. She didn't seem put off by the mess. Instead, her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "This place suits you," she remarked, running a finger along a dusty shelf. "It's got character." Jake chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well, it's no five-star hotel, but it gets the job done." They sat down on a couple of overturned crates, and Emily wasted no time getting to the point. "I've been thinking about what happened that night," she began. "You saved my life, Jake, and I want to repay you." Jake held up a hand immediately. "No, ma'am. You don't owe me anything. Like I said before, anyone would have done the same." But Emily wasn't having it. "Maybe so," she countered gently, "but not everyone did. It was you, and I'd like to help you, without strings attached." For the next hour, they talked. At first, Jake resisted her offers, insisting he didn't need charity. But as the conversation unfolded, Emily's genuine interest in his dreams began to shine through. She asked about his plans for expanding the garage, his struggles with funding, and even his passion for teaching kids basic car maintenance. By the end of their chat, Jake found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. When Emily left that day, she promised to stay in touch. What Jake didn't realize was that she already had a plan brewing, one that would change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening around Jake's garage. New customers began showing up, people driving luxury cars and talking about how they'd heard great things from a friend. Orders for parts arrived faster than usual, sometimes accompanied by notes saying, "Compliments of an anonymous donor." Even the worn-out equipment Jake had been patching together for years was suddenly replaced with top-of-the-line tools. At first, Jake chalked it up to luck or coincidence. But when a brand-new hydraulic lift appeared one morning, with no invoice in sight, he couldn't ignore the obvious anymore. Someone was secretly investing in his business. Then came the social media buzz. Out of nowhere, Jake's garage gained thousands of followers online. Posts praising his honesty and skill went viral, and soon, customers were lining up outside his shop. Business boomed overnight. For the first time in years, Jake found himself hiring extra help just to keep up with demand. One afternoon, as he stood in the middle of his newly renovated garage, now twice its original size, he felt a mix of awe and confusion. Who could be behind all this? And why? The answer came during Emily's next visit. This time, she didn't show up unannounced. Instead, she sent a text asking if they could meet at a nearby cafe. When Jake arrived, she greeted him with a knowing smile. "I think it's time we talked," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents detailing everything: the equipment upgrades, the marketing campaigns, even the glowing reviews posted by hired influencers. "You did all this?" Jake asked, stunned. Emily nodded. "I wanted to give you the opportunities you deserve. Not because I feel obligated, but because you inspired me. Your kindness reminded me what truly matters in life." Jake sat back, overwhelmed. Part of him wanted to protest, to insist he didn't need handouts, but another part recognized the truth in her words. Her generosity wasn't charity. It was partnership. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise, I won't let this go to waste. I'll pay it forward, every chance I get." Emily smiled, looking more at peace than Jake had ever seen her. "That's all I ask." Jake's story wasn't just about luck or coincidence. It was a testament to the power of doing good, even when there's nothing to gain. That night on the stormy highway, he hadn't stopped to think about who was in the car or what they could offer him. He acted out of instinct, driven by compassion and a desire to help someone in need. And while he never expected anything in return, his selflessness opened doors he'd thought were permanently closed. For Emily, meeting Jake was a wake-up call. In her world of wealth and privilege, people often treated her with ulterior motives, smiling faces hiding greedy intentions. But Jake's humility and genuine care reminded her of the values she'd lost sight of: honesty, hard work, and human connection. By helping him, she rediscovered a sense of purpose that no amount of money could buy. Their friendship became a beacon of hope for those around them. Jake used his newfound success to mentor young mechanics, offering free training sessions to kids from low-income families. He also partnered with local charities to provide affordable repairs for struggling families. Meanwhile, Emily began channeling her resources into community projects, inspired by Jake's grassroots approach to making a difference. The ripple effect of their actions spread far beyond Weatherford. Strangers who heard their story were moved to perform acts of kindness themselves, proving that goodness has a way of multiplying. At its core, this tale is about karma, not as some mystical force, but as the natural consequence of our choices. When we choose kindness over indifference, generosity over greed, and action over apathy, we create a chain reaction that can transform lives, including our own. Jake often reflected on how one decision had set everything in motion. "It's funny," he once told Emily during a quiet moment at the garage. "I went into that storm thinking I was just trying to survive. Turns out, I was planting seeds I didn't even know would grow." Emily smiled. Sometimes, the best things in life come from the smallest acts of courage. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Jake Thompson, A man who proved that kindness isn't just a virtue, it's a catalyst for change. But here's the question I want you to take with you. Have you ever done something selfless, thinking it wouldn't matter, and then watched it come back to you in ways you never imagined? Share your stories in the comments below because I know there are so many untold acts of goodness out there waiting to inspire others. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that doing the right thing always matters, even if the rewards aren't immediate. And don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Words for more stories that will move you, challenge you, and leave you believing in the power of humanity. Before you go, let me ask again, where are you from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love hearing from all of you around the world. Until next time, remember this: every act of kindness plants a seed. You might not see it grow today, but trust me, it will bloom when it's meant to. Keep spreading good vibes, and I'll see you in the next one.